Hello, learners. Let us continue where we left off last time. We were talking about this paper by Richa Sharma, and she quotes Glover and Hall on the different forms of learning. So, there is a distinction between intentional learning and incidental learning. Intentional learning is based on exposure to social movements and is planned out. Incidental learning involves young people who get exposure to social movements through social media. So, these are two different forms of absorbing ideas about climate impacts or about climate change. So, I think a lot of the learning today, a lot of the uh, information that young people get, that is online through media and so through social networking, and which is, I think, incidental. But as far as intentional is concerned, then uh, that is, it has to be emphasized more strongly. So, there is an organization called the Australian Youth Climate Coalition. There are many organizations worldwide, many of them are NGOs, and they are all related to climate activism. So, she gives the example of the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, which has a program called Switched On Schools. It holds workshops, training, and leadership programs in high schools. And the aim is to expose young people to the idea of climate justice and to start them in climate action. The UK Student Climate Change Network was established in December 2018. It was inspired by Greta Thunberg for young people under 22. And their mission statement runs thus: stand for mass systemic change, putting diverse youth voices in the forefront of our campaign towards the UK government to ensure a livable future for all. So, she mentions these various organizations when she explains what youth activism is and how they get inspired and how they organize these. So, there's this UK's climate change network, and it was inspired by Greta Thunberg for young people under 21, and their mission statement reveals that they are promoting voices of youth to campaign against UK government to ensure a livable future for all. They want uh, government policy to be changed and to be more sensitive, to be more cognizant towards climate change impacts. UKSCN podcast for planet. So, this was a podcast which she looked at very closely, and she found the episode on climate education very significant. It revealed the views of young climate activists on the importance of educating about climate impacts and climate change. So, I quote her and what she says, what she reports about the activists' own words in this podcast. The present education system is flawed in structure because it builds a labor force for the market rather than equip the learners to deal with climate issues. So, this was something similar that I said earlier, that learning is packaged, education is packaged, and this formula is meant to produce people who will be in the marketplace, will be in the workforce of the capitalist world. So, there is no originality here, and there is no growth, no development of personalities, and they are not taught to deal with climate change. They are not given the tools to deal with the extreme impacts of climate change, which can lead to great and grave psychological impacts, which can lead to serious psychological impacts. So they are not taught how to deal with all these things. She observed that climate activists thought that the education system is basically flawed because it creates a labor force for the market economy and does not equip students with knowledge to face climate change. And she feels it is a flawed system of education which does not complete the personality of the students and which just makes them part of the race for money, for wealth, the race for an American dream. It does not give them a wholeness of personality. It does not give them the knowledge to face a climate crisis, to understand what is happening, so that when it happens, when there are extreme weather events, uh, the what they have gained from their learning will be of no use. And any engagement with climate that students have in school is limited to studying geography and the natural sciences. So, if this education system or if they are private schools, um, they depend on companies for their funding and they are supported by uh, businesses. So, climate change and its impacts are supposed to be actually taboo. They should not be discussed because they hinder what in capitalist terms is growth, growth of economy and progress. So the debate between fossil fuels versus renewable energy resources is presented as a list of pros and cons rather than as an urgent issue. The argument supporting a reversal of climate change is toned down. So even if there is a argument or a debate about renewable and non-renewable energy sources, and so there is no ethical thinking behind that. It's rather the capitalist system that is working behind it. So they leave the discussion to the pros and cons rather than take up climate change as an urgent issue. And if there's an argument about supporting a reversal of climate change, it is much toned down. So, in a system that is ruled by capitalist ideas, by consumerism, by the idea that the greatest success for a person is a high standard of life with a great accumulation of capital and money. So, in that system, education cannot thrive because education also has to be played down. It is not supposed to support anything that is anti capitalist. It is not supposed to um, support anything that is anti growth. So, naturally, climate change is something that opposes both capitalism, economic growth, and uh, commercialism, consumerism. So, it is toned down. And another interesting feature pointed out by another activist is that education teaches students competition rather than collaboration. And climate change resolutions are, as we said earlier, based on collaboration. So, if there is no collaboration, then one cannot handle things individually and alone. So, but education just teaches competition. Who's going to be the best, who's going to get the highest marks, uh, who's going to be the best person, and so there is no collaboration. It's somebody who's at the top is the most successful and the one below is the most unsuccessful. There is the success story and the story of failure, and there's nothing in between. There is no collaboration. Collaboration is not taught. So collaboration, as we have discussed earlier, it is a crucial tool with which climate change can be tackled. we cannot manage without collaboration. So, as we see, any debates about renewable and non-renewable resources and about the harm that they are doing to the environment, all those things are toned down, and they are simply stated as okay, there are some pros and there are some cons, so just neutralizing everything. So there is no urgency, there is nothing called climate threat. Eco anxiety is one of the outcomes of climate impact, and education needs to be updated to meet this challenge. And as I said earlier, uh, students are unprepared to deal with uh, climate impacts. And in schools in India, public schools, um, even when there is some kind of movement or injunction coming from the pressure of activists that climate change education should be introduced into the syllabus. Uh, I mean, it happens at a very sort of very weak and a very soft level. For example, I remember in certain schools, uh, they had these exercises to save yourself from an earthquake. Just suppose if there was an earthquake, what would you do? You would avoid certain things, and there was things that you would do, or you would get onto the tables. So, like, this is quite childish. This is not enough. I mean, the knowledge that is given has to be in depth, and to talk about the whole background of this, not just about one earthquake, but there are so many extreme events. So, greater detail has to be taught, and if it is not done as it is in India, then it leads to eco anxiety or climate anxiety, because people are ill prepared, young people are ill prepared to deal with these challenges. They become anxious, they become depressive, and they exhibit all kinds of mental problems. So, education needs to be updated to meet this challenge. The predominant theme for UKSCN is climate justice across media, open calls, and interviews. So they have this predominant theme in this organization, which is climate justice, which is across media, um, which is across networks. It's open to calls and interviews. Again, I quote from Richa Sharma. At its best, climate justice is rooted in a common battle against hydrocarbon economy, against an economic logic of growth and capital accumulation. So, climate justice is what some people have. They have capital, they have everything, and there are others who suffer because all this capital is accumulated through creating global warming, through this the carbon footprints created through all the work of industry and technology. And the activists, they state that the real aim of climate justice is to protect the most vulnerable. The Eurocentric UK school curriculum is inefficient as at helping climate justice, as the voices of the vulnerable and marginalized are drowned in generalizations. So, if we talk about an example of such schools as in the UK school system, they do not promote climate justice, and the voice of the vulnerable and the marginalized are drowned in generalizations. So, there are ways, if you want to take notice, if you want to pay attention, there are ways of doing that. And if you do not want to pay attention to something and you want to just silence it, so this is the way the voices are silenced, and the education system does not include the voices of the vulnerable people or the marginalized people, which is just uh, expressed with a generalization. She also mentions the Black Lives Matter movement protest to demand justice for the killing of George Floyd in police custody. So, as we mentioned earlier, that climate change impacts have far reaching impacts on human life, and there is something called racism also, that also becomes a part of climate issues. So there were the Black Lives Matter protest to demand for justice, and so UKSCN campaigns for racial justice and discusses racism and climate change and works for strategies for anti-racism. Again, it reminds me of the idea of NNS, and he says that there should be diversity and respect among different cultures, and he is distressed to see how there is a cultural invasion these days, how old cultures, uh, ancient cultures, indigenous cultures are losing out to the industrial forces of consumerism and commercialism. So so this organization realizes that racism too is a part of climate change and tries to work at strategies for anti-racism. The activist stressed on an all-round education of different subjects about the science behind climate change. So they did not say that only climate science has to be studied. They talk about a complete education where there are a number of subjects, and their connections with climate change should be studied. And they also lay emphasis on the importance of including religions, philosophy, and ethics for understanding climate justice. So we can see that what is lacking in the uh, UK system of education, um, there is no knowledge or there is no push to understand climate justice, climate impacts, and they, however, say that there should be all round education where climate change should be discussed through various subjects. And they also lay emphasis on these important subjects such as religions, philosophy, and ethics for understanding climate justice. And they feel that all these subjects would support education in climate justice, in knowing right and wrong, and the conservation and the sacredness of life, which is human and non human. So they feel that these subjects, especially religion, philosophy, and ethics, are important because they help to distinguish right from wrong, and they promote conservation and the sacredness of life, and not only human life but of non human life too. So, what is missing in this education system is things which would connect you with the cycle of life, which would help young people respect the environment, which teach them the science of climate change and how it is connected with a variety of disciplines. In fact, it permeates every part of human life. So this is what the children have to be taught, and they feel that ethics, especially, it will help young people decide between right and wrong, and understand the sacredness of life of humans as well as non-humans. So there is a video here which you can see on young climate activist in India. One of the younger ones is 13-year-old Ridhima Pandey, and then we have 68-year-old Vandana Shiva, and then they are uh, some of the most prominent women leading climate change actors in the country. So look at this video on climate warriors and decide for yourself how important it is to consider the urgency of climate change and not to gloss it over under generalizations or forego it or ignore it because of the capitalist framing of uh, the world and their perception of things. Now, there's another important writer, and his book, Less is More, is a very interesting book. And he talks about resolutions to climate change, and he emphasizes on this word economic growth. Growth is a kind of word that he feels is very negative in implication. It does not have positive implications for environment or for humanity, as we will see as we go deeper into these ideas. So he is for the degrowth movement. So industrial growth and the emphasis on manufacturing more and more goods is, according to him, the cause behind climate change. So he says that industrial growth, which um, is dependent on raw materials, and so it uses these raw materials, you know, sort of depriving the environment of its valuable minerals, oils. So there is an extraction policy. There is a policy for felling trees. There is something about catching fish, which is big business, and exhausting the supply of fish. In the same way, cutting down trees, clearing the mountains. So all these are industrial growth, and they aim at economic progress, economic growth, the cutting down of forests and building expressways and highways, which result in displacement of people. So he says that these are the reasons behind climate change. Then he says, suppose the policy is made to switch to clean energy. Now, even switching to clean energy requires a lot of material. So it makes the ghost of growth of economy to carry on with its life. It does not end this idea of growth. When one is switching on to a different form of energy, then the capitalist lobbies and the industries and the businesses will look for lucrative points in that, selling points in that. So again, it will be about accumulation of capital and extraction. As he says, I quote Jason Hickel, the transition to renewables is going to require dramatic increase in the extraction of metals and rare earth minerals with real ecological cost and social cost. So the decision is that there has to be a transition to renewable energy resources like wind and solar power, etc. That will again lead to an extraction of metals and rare minerals from the earth, which will be again a great ecological cost and also at social costs. So it's not going to change anything. It's So the idea of growth, the idea of accumulation, that is the real evil, and that's why he talks about the degrowth movement. The degrowth movement is, supplying more and more, and putting more and more before the consumers, so they can take things even if they don't want them, which is beyond need. It is not needed, but it is supplied, and more is manufactured, and the consumers are pressed into buying more and more. But degrowth, trying to reverse that idea of growth, that is like a brake applied to capitalism. It means reducing material and energy use. Commodity production by capitalism is around accumulating capital and not satisfying human needs. Remember, Gandhiji said, there is enough for everyone's needs, but not enough for everyone's greed. So, what does capitalism do? It creates greed about accumulating capital, and it does not satisfy human needs. So it does not even fulfill the basic thing, or basic objective of production is to fulfill some need. It does not fulfill needs, it only creates more and more desire. And in fact, in another way, in a very subtle way, not satisfying human needs is a means to get more capital. So leave human beings dissatisfied, and one can earn more capital. So, we look at this, and we see the impact of industrialization, the impact of um, uh, consumerism, commercialism on society, and we see that the the objective is to produce more and more, and to use more and more resources from nature, to drain the rainforest, to destroy the carbon sinks, and destroy the marshes and the water bodies, just because more and more resources are needed. So, for example, in the polar regions, which are there in the northern part of Canada and in America also, what is the state of this growth policy there? In those areas, there is oil extraction, there is a taking away of resources, and there is global warming. So let's stop here. We'll continue in the next lesson.